2. I thank the court for its clemency. Guerrilla headquarters, the Eagle's Nest, Pagman Mountains, north of Kabul, April 29th. 6 days after the raid on the armory, the monastery was humming with activity. Abundant arms and ammunition meant that the 65 men of the Whirlwind could start serious weapons training. A planning section under Qasim was in being. The trucks, well camouflaged, had been overhauled. The captured supplies were stowed in the limitless tunnels. Such was the improvement in morale that Adam was able to get the men working to clear a new secret entrance, formed by water rushing past the place from the melting snows. Now there were 2 completely concealed ways into the mountain, with the observation posts commanding the broad Pagman Valley which lay at its foot, between the Eagle's Nest and the Russian occupiers' domain. The prisoners, who had been brought here blindfolded, were housed in the spacious chambers which, with their brightly coloured wall frescoes, were perhaps the Buddhist abbot's luxurious apartments. They did not know where they were, and when they heard the roar of the Soviet search planes audible even in the caverns, they cowered into corners, convinced that they would be blasted into eternity at any moment. For 3 days after the raid, Russian spotting, transport, attack, training, and every other kind of aircraft, even tiny civilian crop dusters, had whined and clattered above the area. The destruction of a major military installation, not to mention the loss of all its personnel and many of its arms, was no small matter. The Russians themselves did not know what really happened, but the Eagle had good intelligence contacts in Kabul, and he read their reports to the great amusement of the Whirlwind men. Only a large and heavily armed force, trained by professionals, probably American interventionists, could have carried out this raid, claimed one Situation Appreciation paper, a grubby photocopy made on a Russian machine out of office hours. The GRU, military security, had already interrogated Soviet combat, supply, and logistics officers of high rank to determine whether there had been treachery. More and more reports showed how everyone concerned was building up a case which, when reviewed in Moscow, would implicate someone else. During the week, the guerrillas had accumulated a vast amount of fascinating information about the Red Army from the prisoners. Adam had given copies of the Constitution and fundamental laws of Afghanistan to the Russian colonel and his fellow officers, and told them to prepare for a trial for atrocities and war crimes. In the meantime, he collected any data which would help in the struggle against the invaders. To the Afghans south of the Hindu Kush, anything connected with the USSR was a mystery, in spite of their shared border to the north. The Soviet army was even more of an unknown quantity. The more they learnt, the more optimistic the guerrillas became. Socialism was not producing the desired effect. Either the Russians were poor material to begin with, or the regime had well and truly knocked the stuffing out of its captive people. Food for the ordinary Soviet troops and NCOs was very poor. Porridge, noodles, bread, potatoes, and a little fish formed the basis of an unvarying cycle of menus. Sometimes, the Russians said, they got meat, but not very often. In the cavern, the Russian soldiers sampled the officers' rationed and wolfed the superior food with delight, complaining only that there was no vodka, which seemed to obsess them. They explained that they made an illegal brew called samahonka, but they didn't really like it, and they begged for tobacco or cigarettes. The partisans saw that the unbalanced diet had caused many health problems. Lack of vitamins seemed to be at the root of the ulcers, boils, and night blindness so common among the men. They were grateful when they were given powdered milk, which they said was sometimes to be had in barracks at home in Russia, but could not be found in Afghanistan. When the Eagle had asked them whether their poor diet was due to transport difficulties, they said that it was, on the whole, better than they got at home, One gunner claimed that the infrared night sighting equipment was not in use because vitamin deficiencies in food had so limited the night vision of ordinary soldiers that the invisible light projectors and goggles were next to useless. This close-up view of what had been trumpeted as the greatest army on earth provided facts which took time to absorb. The Eagle, having read and heard so much about the Russians as a military power, at first thought the soldiers must be lying. Questioning them individually, however, he found that their accounts bore out one another. A major preoccupation was their pay. On the equivalent of $2.50 a week, a private could not buy extra food or send any money home. Everything went on boot polish, tobacco, shaving soap and blades, and the soldiers had to pay the inflated prices of their canteens. A private's entire pay bought no more than 6 packets of cigarettes a month. An Afghan conscript earned 5 times as much. "They're all paranoid," Qasim said to Adam after one interrogation. "They believe that they are surrounded by enemies. They genuinely imagine that all Afghan guerrillas are organized and accompanied by CIA agents. I'm glad the CIA isn't behind us, but in a way it's a pity they aren't, for then they'd get a picture of what the Russians are really like. See that one over there?" He pointed to a sergeant. "He's a gunner from an artillery regiment sent to the armory to check the shells. He claims that 20% of them are duds." The Russians, to the great surprise of the Mujahideen, didn't wash much. They said that this was because the army gave them little hot water and few opportunities to take a bath. The purpose of military service, they had been told, was to prepare men for war, and there would be no baths in combat conditions. The 170 prisoners had long ago become accustomed to their corporate smell, but they were an embarrassment to the guerrillas, who bathed every day. The deserter Zelikov, he preferred to be called a defector, turned out to be a good cook and an even better barber. He was a conscript from Kiev, and, being in the last couple of months of a 2-year service period, was almost due for repatriation and discharge. When Adam asked him why he hadn't waited another few weeks and gone home, he said, "Once I get back there, I'll never get out again." He was delighted to be a guerrilla, though not anxious to see actual combat. He hated the Soviet system, although he knew no other, and insisted that a large proportion of the population in the USSR shared his dislike. This was especially true of the non-Russians, who he said would soon be in a majority. The stupidity of the Soviet army, in all its forms, was one of his favorite subjects, especially the remoteness of the officers from their men. According to Zelikov, they thought about little except their own promotion. He also said that the officers stole supplies intended for the men. "Vor! Thief!" he would shout, pointing to one or another of them. The prisoners were now left unshackled, but were kept hobbled like horses on ropes which allowed them to walk in their cave prisons, but not to run. It was a situation which needed some supervision, but not much. They seemed to be men without hope, and for the first 2 days of their captivity believed they were going to die. They had been told by official propaganda that the partisans tortured any Russians they captured, and even skinned them alive. Many suffered from a strange depressive melancholy, and others behaved like chronic warriors. Some were to be seen consoling others in quite a moving way. There was even, they said, a special army word, nastroymi, mood, for this sadness. In the Darbar, the assembly hall, as the main cavern had become known, the Eagle convened his court at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 6th day after the Russians had been captured. Mostly rather sullen men, they were unshaven for lack of razors, and of various ages, ranks, and ethnic stocks. 2 of the prisoners were Afghans, interpreters, a lieutenant and a sergeant. Both had been trained in the USSR. In addition to the 128 privates, there were 7 majors, 8 captains, 16 lieutenants, 10 NCOs, and of course, the colonel. This was the usual very high ratio of officers to men in the Soviet army. The charge was murder. The huge vaulted cavern's roof soared like the nave of a Gothic cathedral. Hissing butane gas lamps augmented the dim natural light. The prisoners were ranged to one side of the cave, sitting on blankets, while the guerrilla community, outnumbered by nearly 3 to 1, sat opposite. On the third wall, facing the great oval gap, hung with creepers which was the entrance, sat the eagle and his henchman. The eagle spoke in Dari Persian. The legitimacy of the forces of the Mujahideen, the smugglers, is established by the Constitution of the Sovereign State of Afghanistan, promulgated on Mizan 9, 1343, which is equivalent to October 10, 1964 of the Christian era, signed at the Gulkhana Palace by King Idries Shah. He had been careful to include copies of the laws of Free Afghanistan when stocking the fortress. I refer to Title 3, Article 39, which runs as follows. He paused and said to the captured Afghan lieutenant, "You will translate what I am saying without deviation into Russian, first saying that, according to the Constitution, there are only 2 official languages in this country, Dari Persian and Pashto. We are using Dari, but the prisoners may communicate through you or directly in either." When this had been conveyed to the Russians, the colonel stood up. "I am Colonel Alexander Petrov of the Red Army of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. I demand that this farce be stopped and that I and my men be released immediately. Failure to comply will result in the most crushing consequences. You should realize that you will all be hanged if you do not obey, regardless of our own fate." Arrest had restored some of the colonel's confidence. As if on cue, or at a signal, one of the guerrilla lookouts came running into the cave and handed the eagle several sheets of paper. He looked at them, smiled, and said, "You Russians certainly do seem to think alike, Colonel. These are leaflets, supposedly from the Kabul government, which are dropping like snow all over the place. They are addressed to us. I shall read what they say. People of the mountains, deceived Afghans, captives of the anachronistic clergy, the aristocrats, landlords and backward tribal chiefs, misinformed bandits. This is an appeal from the legitimate Republican and Socialist government of our beloved country. The imperialist Zionists and their lackeys, the Pakistanis and Iranians, as well as the Egyptians, the Chinese and other enemies of the revolution and of the people, have deceived you. Lay down your arms and join us in the building of a free, noble, progressive homeland. Kill the British, American, West German, French and all other agents and spies among you. Release the soldiers of the brotherly Soviet army, here as peacemakers and at the invitation of the legitimate, progressive, benign and homeland-loving, Islam-believing, single and only government of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. Know that the President, His Excellency Aga Barbaric Karmal, has announced an amnesty. You will be free to return to your homes, to your crops and animals, to your wives and children. Accept the amnesty. Join the joyful new day." There was a roar of derisive laughter from the assembled Afghans. The man on the eagle's left, Tirandaz the sharpshooter, grinned. "It is quite poetic, Eagle, but they have a long way to go before their posy competes with that of the great Sadi, Hafiz or Rumi. But it's nice to know that they are trying." The eagle, when the leaflet had been translated to the Russians by the very uncomfortable interpreter, said, Barbaric Kamal's airborne petition to the Mujahideen on behalf of the Russian prisoners and their friends is dismissed. To continue. In accordance with the Afghan Constitution, Title 3, Article 26, Paragraph 2, I inform the prisoners of their rights. I quote, "Innocence is the original state. The accused is considered innocent unless found guilty by a final judgment in a court of law." The colonel shouted, "This isn't a court of law." "I hereby declare," continued the Eagle, "this assembly, composed of citizens of Afghanistan, to be a court of law under the fundamental law of Afghanistan. The charge against the accused is murder, direct murder, or alternatively, indirect by collusion, before or after the event. The penalty for murder in this country, as in Russia, is, and has always been, death." Pandemonium broke out among the Russians when they heard the translation of this charge. Some cried out, others tried to run forward and throw themselves on the ground in front of the Eagle and his companions. Only the colonel remained calm, evidently trying to give an example to the rabble. The Afghans, unused to such excitable behaviour, leaned forward interestedly, eagerly pointing out to one another the more hysterical of the Russians, looking at the scuffles as the terrified men argued among themselves, and wondering what could be the subject of such disputes. All the Soviet prisoners, whether Slavs, Balts, Tatars, or Tajiks, seemed equally affected. 3 shots rang out. "I haven't got a gavel," the Eagle explained, putting his smoking revolver back into its holster. "But be careful that I don't shoot someone by mistake. I might, if your restlessness makes me too excited." The shivering mob subsided, their eyes fixed on him. Some were wringing their hands in silence, others groaned or repeated like a litany, "Lord, have mercy." "Eagle, this is going to take a year. Why don't we get on with it?" Kasim was getting bored. The Eagle turned to the prisoners. "You must listen, or we'll make you listen. The fundamental law, while prescribing the death penalty, provides for mitigation. It states that, in the case of murder, the bereaved may relent and accept compensation instead of revenge. If any of you are found guilty, I shall ask the assembled people here, the Afghans, who are accepted as the bereaved in the case of the massacre at Kalantut, to pronounce whether they will accept compensation, or whether they still insist upon the execution of the death penalty, as is their right." The colonel was still trying. "I demand liberty, and at once, for all of us." He shook his fist. The rest of the Russians again intoned in a deep chorus, "Lord, have mercy." The Eagle held up his hand for silence and looked at his copy of the Constitution. "The accused Alexander Petrov will take note of Title 3, Article 26, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution, an abstract of which was furnished him yesterday, together with other relevant papers. Liberty is the natural right of the human being. This right has no limitations except the liberty of others and public interest as defined by law." He turned to the colonel. "Alexander Petrov, you will recognize this court and allow us to continue, representing your associates yourself or nominating someone else, who may be anyone of your choice, or I shall immediately hand you over for summary trial by consensus to the Jirga, the assembly of the Afghans present today. The Adat, customary law, allows for this as an alternative to your accepting the authority of our court." This really interested the Afghan crowd. Cries of, "People without honour!" and "Hand the murderers over to us, Eagle!" filled the air. Turbans were unrolled and waved, and a group began to sing the national hymn. Zindabad Qaum, Sabuland Bashad, Afghan. Long live the people, honoured, eminent be the flag of the Afghan. The buglers were practising their own war cry like a football crowd, shouting it out syllable by syllable. The trumpeters are here. When order was restored once more, the colonel said wearily, "I accept the jurisdiction of the court." Petrov Alexander, citizen of the Soviet Union, are you guilty, directly or by association, of the murder of one or more of the people of Kalantut? I am not guilty in either sense. Is any one or are any number of your associates guilty in either sense? None of them is guilty in either sense. The court regards them as innocent until guilt can be proved. Qasim Hashemi will now state the facts. Qasim rose. Respected Sir, the entire resident population of Kalantut village, Kabul Governorate, was seen by me and 4 others dead, murdered according to a witness by Russian troops from the Afghan field armory occupied by elements of the USSR's 360th Motorized Rifle Division. The evidence of our eyes, Russian ammunition, and a witness attest to this, though the witness died of his wounds. Colonel Petrov has admitted the guilt of his men to our commander when Battle Group Kalantut was recapturing the armory in the national interest. The colonel stood up. President of the court, the witness has failed to add that I voluntarily said that I was about to punish the men who had committed the offence. Sit down, said the eagle. If an offence has been committed, and none disputes that, and if you say that you knew about it and were even going to punish its perpetrators, you cannot plead that your men are not guilty. One of the eagle's men whispered to Qasim, "Is our eagle a lawyer?" "No, he's a professor of technology in the Faculty of Science of the University of Kabul." The questioner looked awestruck at this answer. The colonel was on his feet again. "I was prevented from doing my duty." "You mean that you would have tried the men for murder of innocent civilians, women and children?" "Gospodin President, the charges had not yet been framed. You led the attack which overwhelmed us. I had no time." "You were overwhelmed by bugles, a drain pipe, the treachery of one of your own men, and by 2 or 3 of us, that's all. But never mind that. We'll take your argument into account. Have you anything else to say?" The colonel, his face a mask of tension, seemed to have used up most of his reserves of energy in his earlier sallies. "Gospodin, sir, you give me some hope. It was a matter of the honour of the Red Army. We would have tried the men." The eagle paused a moment, then said, "We have never heard of any such trials before. But, Petrov, we know of the murders of innocent people by your forces in our country. 6,000 men, women and children, the entire population of a village called Atranak near Kunduz, was massacred in May 1980. That is only one of your crimes." "That is all I can say, Gospodin. Of course, if the party or the security services intervenes, the sentence is not carried out." "Why would that be?" "On the legal grounds that the men were acting in the interests of overall security against spies and saboteurs." "And you would agree with that?" "I am not consulted in such matters." "We shall take account of that too. Has the accused anything more to say?" "Yes, Gospodin." "Say it then." "When you captured the armory, 42 men were in the barrack block nearest to the water tower." "Yes." "Those men are all missing." "Yes. They died to a man when they tried to break out, after the order to surrender had been given. There was fighting. We lost 6 men there through their action." "President of the court, Those men of ours were in detention precisely because they were to be accused of killing your compatriots at the village of Kalantut." The eagle was surprised. Either this was true, or else it was a most ingenious idea. Blame the dead. Aloud he said, "If they were in detention accused of a crime, how could they get out so easily and attack us, fully armed, and kill 6 men? The Russian shrugged. "You saw the arms and ammunition piled in the open. They got out of the block and seized grenades and other weapons. That's all." "I repeat, how did they get out of detention so easily, Petrov?" "They were not locked in. There was no need. They knew that if they left the block they would be shot by the guards. There was no hope of escape." "If they were under detention and likely to be punished by your court of inquiry, why were they so keen to break out and help in the defense of the camp when it was attacked?" "I can only think that they wanted to redeem themselves. If they had helped to defeat the attack, it would have counted in their favor at a court-martial." The eagle looked straight at him. "Colonel, is it not possible that those men had hoped to arm themselves and get away, perhaps to join the Mujahideen, as so many Russian soldiers have already done?" Petrov looked away, then sighed. "It is possible, President." "Another question, Colonel. Is self-incrimination allowed in Russian courts?" "Yes, it is normal. The courts rely on it." "And lastly, is there presumption of innocence or presumption of guilt?" "Anyone who goes before any court in the Soviet Union is presumed guilty. This is based on the contention that no innocent person ever gets as far as a court of law. He or she would have been exonerated during the preliminary investigation." "Thank you." "Господин President." "Yes, Colonel?" "I said that we were innocent and did not want to recognize your court precisely because, in our country, I would have been admitting guilt if I had acknowledged that I had been arraigned before a properly constituted court. You must allow us time to get used to your ways." "Our ways, Colonel, are the ways of the entire civilized world. We have had these ways for thousands of years. You have only had your ways for, 60 years? Your ways are the ways of the dictator, not of humanity. You should not need time." Although the Russians' words were being translated faithfully for the assembled Afghan multitude, some of the finer points seemed to be escaping them. Kasim nudged the eagle. "I think that we should summarize for the people. They are getting restless again." The eagle stood up, the better to be seen and heard, and moved into the space between the two parties. "Afghans and prisoners, the case is simple, but everyone must know what it means. I shall explain in a few words. Now listen. It is admitted that the villagers were massacred. Someone must pay for it. The colonel claims innocence for himself and for all his men who are here today. The law upholds him, as we have found none who can say that anyone here has committed murder. In his own regiment, the colonel acts as judge. He states that he had no time to put the murderers on trial, so we cannot find him guilty. We are also told that the men in detention at the camp were the real murderers, who killed without orders or permission. All those men are now dead. It is my judgment that justice has been done, even if only by accident, with the killing of the Russian murderers. Under the law of requital, the blood of the people of Kalantut has been avenged. Now we must surely acquit these men, for no blood is on them, so far as we know." The eagle at first saw only the poetic justice and the elegance of the solution, as if fate had arranged the whole matter and planned the outcome. But the Afghans wanted blood. Most of them, after all, had not been at the battle, had not seen what was involved, and had only heard of the massacre at second hand. It was the non-combatants, deprived of the release afforded by battle, who felt most deeply about justice and revenge. The assembly drowned the voice of the Afghan interpreter, shouting for revenge. They cried out the names of relatives who had been burned by napalm, who had suffocated in gas, who had been hunted down like rabbits by strafing jets or blown apart by helicopter rockets. They threw sandals, and their cries became one voice, terrible in the echoing vastness of the immense cavern. Marg bar Rus, Marg bar Katulun, death to the Russians, death to the murderers. Like every natural leader, the eagle knew that time would reduce tension if he let them have their say. The shouting went on for 10 minutes or more as he returned to his seat and sat, impassively, waiting. The Russians, pitiful pictures of hopelessness, huddled in groups, clutching one another, even clawing at the cave wall, fear in their eyes, a fear made more terrible than those of cornered animals by the human ability to think about the future. They were visualizing torture, dismemberment, a sordid and meaningless death. Zelikov had a word for it. Demoralizatsiya, Commandant, he whispered. The eagle was getting a first-hand demonstration, and it was to be the first of many, of the fragile esprit de corps of the Soviet army. Adam remembered reading some of the literature. Following the Second World War, all other modern armies had concentrated upon encouraging small bodies of men to form fighting groups. Such men remained together from their early training days and through active service. The result was an army made up of a large number of strongly bonded units, like the hunting groups of man throughout the ages. The Russians had rejected this formula because, as their own documents, closely studied by the CIA and other intelligence agencies, showed, they feared combinations of people. Men were regularly moved from one unit to another. Units were endlessly transferred. Bonding was never given a chance to happen, even by accident. In consequence, units easily fell apart. Captives joined the enemy, especially if the enemy had the camaraderie which the Russians lacked and no doubt craved. Desertions and suicides were surprisingly frequent, and the rapport between men and officers was not good enough to ensure morale capable of surviving adversity to the extent which most other modern armies regarded as normal. One reason for the startlingly poor quality of the Russian combat troops, even the best of them, was probably the large proportion of them who were alcohol dependent. Adam had not read the many accounts published abroad showing alcoholism as a major problem in the Soviet Union, much less the confession of one Russian soldier, "Even if you are not an alcoholic when you go into the army, you are when you come out." But he was now getting evidence at first hand. More than half of all the Russian soldiers taken prisoner craved alcohol. Some begged for drink, others showed alarming withdrawal symptoms. Adam, in the past week, had come across another factor which might well contribute to the indifferent quality of the Soviet soldier. Although the army drew from all ranks in society, his prisoners constantly complained that what they called very intelligent people, as well as those with good contacts, contrived to keep out of the army altogether, buying successive deferments by bribery or going into higher education. The storm of Afghan protest at what they thought was incomprehensible leniency had subsided to a mere background murmur, so Adam judged the time was ripe to take charge again. He stood up. "All this does not mean that our prisoners can get away without some recompense to us. After all, we have worked and taken great risks to acquire them. So I have a proposal to make. We owe ourselves a debt, a great one, to certain people whom most of us do not even know. People who, maybe, had hardly heard the word Afghanistan till a year or two ago. But these people in far-off lands learnt of our plight and answered the call of humanity. They came here and tended our sick. Many are still doing so, undergoing the same hardships as us and for no material reward. They eat poor food and have to drink polluted water. They catch diseases, they are hunted by helicopters, and still they come. They are the doctors and nurses of international medical aid, Médecins Sans Frontières, and other organizations, and they are saving hundreds of lives. It is evidence of the rottenness of our traitors' minds that Keshtmand, Karmal's prime minister, has publicly said that he sees this selfless work as a cover for other missions. Kabul cannot see the heroism and sacrifice of these good people. One of these, a 30-year-old doctor called Philippe Auguiard, was captured in January 1983 by the communists while tending the sick. His trial as a spy was filmed and shown on television. By this travesty of justice, the communists revealed their own evil better than their worst enemies could. The film was shown here in Afghanistan and released worldwide. It shows the exhausted Dr. Auguiard, a broken man, being sentenced to 8 years' imprisonment for espionage. As the cameras recorded the scene, the doctor thanked the court for its mercy. This was on March 13, 1983. The crime was, in fact, committed by the Soviets, jailing an innocent man. As a result, the name of the Russians and of our country stinks in the nostrils of civilization. Do you wish it to be so? The eagle raised both arms into the air. I therefore propose that we offer these Russian prisoners as part exchange for the unconditional release of the gallant Dr. Auguiard. Although he is only one man, he is worth 10 times as much as this trash from the new civilization. The Afghans cheered. When the possibility of their release registered in their benumbed brains, the captive Red Army men again intoned one of their hardly cheering dirges. The interpreter rendered it as Russia Madar I Mukadas, Holy Mother Russia. On June 3, 1983, it was announced by the Afghan chargé d'affaires in Paris that Dr. Philippe Auguiard had been reprieved and would leave Afghanistan within the next few days. By June 9th, the French embassy in Kabul stated that he had been handed over to them. By the middle of the month, he reached Paris. The trial was over, and the fate of the prisoners decided. Afterwards, in one of the smaller caves which Adam used as an orderly room, Qasim showed the eagle a collection of what appeared to be waste paper, scraps from the backs of envelopes, even bits of cloth. While they were waiting for the trial, he said, the Nikolais asked that these, their last letters home, might be sent there for them. Letters home? The baker Nanpaz was eavesdropping and could not hide his puzzlement. Are these men or not? Perhaps, given more time, they would have sent home samples of their needlework as well. They kill children, and they write letters home. They firebomb us and ask us to be postmen. The baker suddenly gave a great laugh. If that's what the Russians are like, Afghanistan has nothing to fear. The Russian prisoners of war never saw their socialist paradise again. When they were interrogated by the GRU, it was officially decided that their spell in captivity had produced disturbing symptoms of bourgeois thinking. According to information that reached the Eagles Band through their double agents in the KHAD, the prisoners revealed taints of sympathy with the Afghan bandits. Some had stated, defiantly, that the rebels were not counter-revolutionaries but patriots, and one Russian private had said, "They are farmers and workers like us." The Mujahideen never learnt how the Russian hostages and their dangerous sympathies were disposed of. They were very probably shot. They did, however, return to their homeland in an all too familiar form, as cinders in the little chromium-plated urns which now grace so many homes in the Soviet Union. News travels fast in Afghanistan. Soon the shabnamas, or night letters, passed from hand to hand in towns and villages, were full of the eagle's exploits, some real, some imaginary. In the tea houses and marketplaces, in government offices and army barracks, the equivocal name was whispered, in hope or in fury, more and more often, as the Russians became bogged down in their Afghan adventure, and as the spirits of the people rose accordingly. The Russians, true to type, assumed that he was the leader of a great countrywide conspiracy, supported from outside and directing an organization of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of men. Nothing less could dare to oppose them. Nothing else could have carried out the exploits all over Afghanistan, which were ascribed to him. Abroad, people accustomed to thinking in conventional terms were delighted that the Afghans had thrown up a national leader at last. But the Afghans, unlike other peoples, did not work in that way. They had always won their wars against occupiers in the past, even with an equivalent disparity of weapons, but never by following a single man at the outset of the struggle. Adam Durrani knew that an Afghan leader, living and fighting amid such a highly individualistic people, must act as a catalyst. The Afghans would indeed rally to a leader, but only after he had proved himself, and after they, too, had some gains to bring to the contract. They always enlisted under a leader's banner as equals. For this reason, the Eagle had three objectives. First, to hurt the Russian invader and make him pay. Second, to establish his own success. Third, to raise the fighting consciousness of other Afghans, and to help them establish their positions as victorious warriors. When he heard the radio reports of the exiled political men wrangling in Pakistan and Europe, Adam laughed. When from the same source he listened to thoughtful but misguided military experts explaining, with copious references to Vietnam, Yugoslavia and elsewhere, that nothing important can happen among the Afghans until they rally behind a single national leader, he shook his head. Experts they might be, experts in anything but the facts of Afghan history. It was less than a month after the trial of the Russians at Pagman that Adam decided to descend upon another stockpile of weapons. Since the Afghan army had become so unreliable, their arms and ammunition had been dispersed throughout the country under Russian control, and only issued to Afghan units with the strictest precautions. This, in fact, was only when the Soviet troops pushed them forward to attack rebel strongholds, and kept them covered from the flanks and rear. The arms store, which was Adam's new target, was at the peak of the Standard Bearer, north of Kabul. He planned to attack it, neutralize the opposition, take away what he could and destroy the rest. Afterwards, making known what he had done and how he had done it, he would use the exploit to encourage others and to underline his motto, daring and guile. Like the Soviets themselves, the Afghan army was short of trucks. Just as all transport in the USSR is available and earmarked for military use, so the Afghan army also commandeers anything on wheels when needed. A line of such trucks, seized from firms and merchants large and small, had just driven into the guarded area of the dump, full of weapons and explosives. The Eagle had reconnoitred the place and observed its routines several times. Today he saw that, as on previous occasions, the vehicles had stopped just inside the high-wire perimeter fence to be unloaded later in the day. Deliveries, he had noted, stayed loaded until the changeover of guard duties. In another half an hour, just after nightfall, the last truck of the evening would arrive. This one always carried miscellaneous dispatches and supplies. He and Qasim withdrew, parallel to the road, to await the final truck. When it was a mile from its destination, two figures, in heavy sheepskin coats and carrying boxes such as are common among wandering peddlers in Afghanistan, signalled to the driver of this truck that they wanted a lift. The driver looked out of the cab. "What's this nonsense? This isn't a bus service for beggars. We're only going up to the military camp anyway. Get out of the way, snake venom upon your fathers." "Respected sir, the officers in there have called for us. How can we refuse such a command?" The eagle's whine was perfect mimicry. "Called for you, idiots? That's impossible. The officers there are gentlemen. They don't talk to scavengers, buffoons, carrion." "Sir," said Qasim, rewrapping a greasy turban around his head and scratching for non-existent fleas, "we are afraid of the Roos too. If we don't get to see them, they'll be angry with you as well." This did not seem at all likely to the sergeant driver. But, he reflected, such effrontery from people like this, people of this low class, usually meant that there was something in what they said. "Who are you? What do you want? If you're not lying, where is your kagaz, your paper?" "Excellency, of course I have one. I'll show it to you." Adam opened the passenger door and climbed into the cab, pulling his dirty suitcase behind him. Before the driver knew it, a very long, thin knife was nearly in his ribs. "Just drive on when my friend knocks on the partition behind you, my little nightingale, or your stomach will feel this without your mouth having tasted it." There were 3 distinct raps from the back. Qasim, holding a grenade with the pin out and his fingers on the spring release, was too close to the 3 soldiers sitting guard over the load for them to want to make a move. The truck rolled towards the entrance of the camp. Moments later they were in, past the board guard at the gate, and parked at the side of the last weapons truck standing just beyond the wire. Qasim jumped down first, pushing the 3 terrified soldiers, their knees knocking before him, into the shadows beside the guardhouse. The eagle brought his own prisoner to join them, and all 5 men stood silently, waiting, while he went back for his case. Adam reappeared in a moment, wearing a gas mask, and took over from Qasim, who put on his own mask and produced 2 strange-looking objects from the huckster boxes. In another minute, the masked man had sprayed from their Smith & Wesson gas generators just enough disabling mist to knock out the camp guards, and pushed the prisoners from the truck in among them. After that, it was easy. Jumping into the driver's seat of the last supply truck, Qasim started the engine, while Adam planted timed explosive charges where they would do most harm, then ran to join his friend. The truck careered in reverse to the main road, and they were away. They had used only a little of the anesthetic gas from the dainty little apparatus, weighing no more than 8 kilograms, which could produce gas from its pump and tank for as long as 45 minutes. They were 3 minutes away from the peak of the standard bearer when the depot went up, with a roar and a blast wave which rocked the hurtling truck, while an orange glare lit the surrounding countryside and illuminated a thick cloud of oily smoke, which stood out against the white clouds of the sky. As the 2 guerrillas shook hand in mutual congratulation, the eagle wondered what the American suppliers would have thought of the use to which their equipment had been put. The sample units had been sent some time before to the Afghan police for riot control evaluation, and had fallen into the hands of desperadoes like Adam and Qasim. The Americans had been careful enough at the time to ensure that the gas generators went direct to the laboratory of Dr. Adam Durrani, the eminent technologist at Kabul University, a very responsible man. Next morning, complete strangers in the streets of Kabul were shaking hands and embracing. In Herat, 400 miles away, The streets rang with the cry, "Victory at Standard Bearer Peak! Long live the Eagle!"